So thank you everyone for joining. This is our September hack. For anyone who wasn't there a bit earlier when I was doing housekeeping, make sure to mute when you're not speaking. And we do encourage people to join on video. It gives a bit more of a community discussion feel with the hacks, which we like to do. Now I'm saying this word hacks, that for anyone who doesn't know, that's the Housing Action Coalition. The hack series is sort of the monthly discussion-based, action-focused event that SV at Home hosts. And it's usually the last Friday every month, but today we moved it to Thursday since many folks are attending the NPH conference tomorrow. But next month we should be on schedule again. We should be October 30th having our next hack, which is the final Friday of October. So today we're joined by the perfect guests. We have Graciela, Castillo-Krings, and Michael Lane. And also, let's see, I think we have a small enough group here. We can do introductions real quick. Let's do it quickly. Let's do just your name, city you live in, and your organization, if you like. And I'll ask people to unmute so that we know what order to go in.
Hi, this is Jill Huff. I'm with CHS Consulting Group in San Jose, and we do transportation planning.
Hi, I'm Krista Brown. I live in Oakland, and I'm with the San Francisco Foundation.
Hi, I'm Edgardo Laber. I'm with the Jewish Federation and Jewish Community Relations Council of Silicon Valley.
Hi, my name's Cassidy. I work for Senator Scott Wiener and I live in Sacramento.
I'm Steve Levy. I live in Palo Alto and I'll represent Palo Alto Forward today.
Hi, I'm Norma Schroeder. I live in Los Altos and I'm with our local affordable housing group.
Hi, Mary Murtaugh. Sorry, my picture isn't working. EAH Housing.
I am Nick Hamilton, independent consultant in Menlo Park.
Hi, I'm Beilu Naisky. I represent NPH as the policy associate, and I'm in Sacramento.
Hi, I'm Sue Russell. I live in Los Altos, active with the League of Women Voters and a local affordable housing group, and also Mountain View Housing Justice Coalition.
Hello, I'm Donna Davies in Mountain View with the League of Women Voters Affordable Housing Committee.
Hi, I'm Lauren Bigelow. I'm partnership for the Bay's Future Fellow at the City of Palo Alto, and I live in Menlo Park.
My name is Tim Clark. I'm with the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. I live in Portola Valley.
Hi, I'm Radha Seshagiri. I live in Berkeley, California, and I work for Next Gen California, representing housing issues.
My name is Bill Sundstrom. I'm a professor at Santa Clara University, and I live in Palo Alto.
Hi, I'm Melissa or Mel Nam, and I'm with Housing Trust, and I live in Campbell.
Hello, I am Bob Brunton, candidate for State Assembly District number 25.
Hi, Vince Rocha with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. I work on housing and land use policy.
Hi, my name is Ruth Ferguson. I work in the Office of Assemblymember Mark Berman, working on housing and transportation policy, and I just moved from Menlo Park to San Francisco.
Hi, I'm Erica Zerbeño. I'm also from Next Gen and I'm based out of Sacramento. Hi, I'm Leslie Corsilia. I'm with Silicon Valley at Home, and I'm from San Jose.
I'm David Meyer. I'm also from Silicon Valley at home, formerly of Mountain View, but I currently live in Reno, Nevada.
I'm Kevin Dowling. I'm with Habitat for Humanity East Bay, Silicon Valley.
Hello, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I was waiting for that to happen. My name is Caitlin Armstrong. I'm Legislative Director for Senator Jerry Hill in the Sacramento area.
Hi, I'm Diana Odell. I'm a principal planner with Redwood City, working on housing planning, and I live in Sunnyvale.
Hi, I'm Stephen Yang. I'm Senior Loan Officer at the Housing Trust, and I live in Sunnyvale.
Hi, I'm Lou Hansen. I'm a housing reporter with the Bay Area News Group, and I live in Palo Alto.
You want to go ahead, Gabby?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Were we introducing ourselves? I'm Gabby Chavez Lopez. I'm our communications manager at Silicon Valley at Home. It's good to see you. Hi, Michael. It's been a little while.
Hello, Gabby.
Good to see everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, that's most of the folks. There are a few folks where their pictures moved around, so I couldn't quite catch. So if you haven't introduced yourselves, just go and we'll try not to run into each other, but it's okay if we do a little bit. Or maybe we got everyone.
I'll just go quickly then. Kevin Ma, he, him, Palo Alto, Peninsula for Everyone Volunteer.
Cool. Well, so good to have such a diversity of different folks working on all different parts of housing issues and other issues that are just related to housing in the room with us. It's always good to have those different perspectives. Today, our guests are the perfect guests for this topic, talking about the legislature and what's happened on housing this year, what didn't happen on housing this year, and what maybe will, should happen on housing next year. We have with us today, Graciela Castillo-Krings. Graciela is a lobbyist with Sacramento Advocates and has more than 15 years public service in California government. Most recently as Deputy Legislative Affairs Secretary to Governor Jerry Brown. In her previous capacity, she negotiated complex policy through both legislative and budget processes. And prior to working in the governor's office, Graciela was the legislative director for the Department of Resources, Recycling, and Recovery. Graciela has extensive experience working with the administration and the legislature, and she is proud to represent SB at Home in Sacramento. We also have with us Michael Lane, who you can see is sharing the PowerPoint right now. He leads SPUR's San Jose policy work across a range of priorities, including housing, transportation, and economic development. He also contributes to SPUR's regional policy work and leads SPUR's state housing policy advocacy. He was actually, before that, he was our deputy director here at SB at Home. And before that was the policy director for the nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California, NPH, the same one's having the conference tomorrow. There he was formulating and executing local, regional, state, and federal policy, legislation, and funding initiatives. He was also held elective office as a school board and a city council member. So Michael, tell us about California's housing agenda.
Well, great. Thank you, Mitch, and thank you all for joining. It's a pleasure to be with you and SV at Home, and to present with Graciela as your lobbyist in the Capitol. It's a real honor to work with Graciela. We'd actually worked together for that 2017, that big housing package when she was in the Brown administration. And it's wonderful now to have her in the third house advocating with us, as we say, for affordable housing in the Capitol. And so pleased to be able to share with her today. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of help frame a bit the discussion, then turn it over to Graciela for her comments and perspective. And then we want to kind of open up for a dialogue about what people think we should bring back immediately next year in terms of legislation, but also new ideas that people think we should bring forward as legislation. And so we'll do that. And so I'll start off here with just what I wanted to give people a sense of is what SPUR is doing now in the Capitol with a kind of a more high profile presence, and what our agenda is and what we focus on. Obviously, there are groups that are advocating for 100% affordable housing, and we support those efforts and oftentimes support bills in that space. And then also there are groups focused on tenant protections and tenants' rights, et cetera. And there are times when SPUR also supports those bills, as we did, for example, with AB 1482 of last year, which was the David Chu bill for the rent stabilization bill, as you'll recall. But what we really found is that there's a need for additional advocacy, particularly what we're calling missing middle and moderate income housing, because that can be provided without public subsidies, so that we can really direct our finite resources in terms of public subsidies to low, very low, and extremely low income households that need that assistance. And are there ways that we can actually bring down the cost and the time to build housing, market rate and affordable housing? And you can see some of our key priorities are dealing with proper zoning, entitlements, and affordability by design. Are there ways that we can create more affordability? Obviously, land costs are extremely high, cost of construction, and particularly when you need to do steel over concrete, kind of a building typology, Class A Type 1 buildings are just always going to be very expensive. And of course, single family homes, particularly in Silicon Valley, are very expensive. So are there things that we can do in between that and try to increase that home ownership rate, particularly for lower income families and families of color? So we're also thrilled that Habitat for Humanity is one of our key coalition partners as well in that, because a lot of the zoning and streamlining and entitlement improvements that we need to make also apply both for a for sale product or for rental developments. Also very interested in looking at local impact fees and how we can rationalize those and bring down the cost of those. Understanding that housing is also a social good, and so it can only pay for a limited number of additional social goods before we just drive projects into infeasibility. I wanted to let you know we've got a couple SPUR-sponsored bills that are currently sitting on Governor Newsom's desk, and I'm cautiously optimistic that he will sign these. AB 831 by Assemblymember Grayson's, some cleanup from SB 35 based on implementation, including Valco, but also in other developments across the state. We've identified some need to provide some additional clarification. That bill will help to do that. And then AB 2553 takes the concept like we have with the tiny homes and bridge housing communities in San Jose and allow that type of a program to happen statewide. Assemblymember Berman came onto this bill and also provided language around safe parking programs that jurisdictions are trying to implement and provide them with some CEQA exemptions to be able to do those expeditiously. Those both, by the way, have urgency clauses that will take effect immediately, and they require 2/3 votes to get off both floors and get out of the houses and to the governor's desk. And so that demonstrates significant broad support for these policy areas. This is what the Senate housing package looked like back in May when it was introduced. As you'll recall, SB 50 had failed in January, which seems a lifetime away now, but Pro Tem Atkins and a group of senators, including more moderate suburban senators, came together around a housing package that would provide progress in terms of housing development and increase in supply and production. Due to the failure of SB 50, could there be some agreements that the senators could reach and bring forward a package this year? We weren't sure at first when the pandemic first hit if anything at all would be possible, and then we were very thrilled that the Pro Tem and her fellow senators brought forward this package. I only provide this slide for you because none of these actually made it to the finish line this year that you're looking at there, to give you a sense of what didn't happen and what may need to come back. Parenthetically, I would say the Assembly also later released their own housing package, but they did so after they waited to find out which bills would not make it through their own house and which members, of their own members would have their bills killed in their own houses. And there were significant ones, including AB 3155, which we can talk about, by Rob Rivas, kind of a small lot subdivision development bill, AB 3155, that was actually held in Assembly appropriations. But the Assembly didn't do that much better. They had an 8-bill package, ended up with 3 that came out of their House and are moving forward. And of course, Buffy Wicks had a couple of those. including a bill about replacement parking requirements on church lands, religious institutions, and that you don't have to replace the parking that you take out to provide housing on those sites. And then also a bill to rezone and require some missing middle zoning for at least 25% of your mod and above mod housing requirement through the RENA process. Unfortunately, that bill was amended and won't take effect until the next housing element cycle. So we won't catch it in time for this one. Another thing to note is not even on this list here that didn't make it this year was the SB 899 by Senator Weiner, which is another one of those what we call YIGBY, yes in God's backyard bills, kind of complementary to what Assemblymember Wicks had done. And that bill would have allowed by right development of 100% affordable housing on those same religious institution properties and private nonprofit colleges as well. So this is the focus on missing middle and moderate income that we're stepping up and trying to provide a coalition of support for, in addition to, like I say, to the 100% affordable and homelessness efforts and tenant protections, which are all part of a larger across the board approach. These were three of the bills that didn't make it, but I bring them up just because it demonstrates the theme of the kind of the small subdivision developments, 10 lots or less, trying to find ways to create affordability by design, bring down the cost of construction and cost per unit to try to increase that home ownership rate, as we had mentioned, which is very important to a lot of our Bay Area caucus and in particular, but really across the state now there's a growing movement because our home ownership rate is significantly lower than other parts of the United States. But all three of these bills also did not make it. And then I just wanted to point out in particular AB 1315 from Assemblymember Berner Horvath. She's actually from Encinitas in Southern California. And as you'll know, that was a jurisdiction in San Diego County that's had trouble getting a housing element approved and litigation and et cetera, because they had an anti-growth local measure that they had adopted, and they couldn't even, really zone sufficiently to meet their housing element requirements. And so they've had issues with HCD to get an approved housing element. But the fact, and she hasn't been particularly a housing champion, but the fact that she was willing to bring forward a bill, I think, is significant because she actually opposed most of the other bills that have brought forward in terms of housing. So it just shows that there may be an opportunity here to bring forward these types of bills, in particular, to have a full complement of bills across the types of housing, the building typologies, and the household incomes that's really needed. I mean, SPUR's, and I would just direct you to our website, but I won't go over it today, but Sarah Karlinski at SPUR has done a paper on what it would really take to make the Bay Area affordable. And our backlog of housing, even at the moderate level, hundreds of thousands of units would need to be built, both for the backlog and then going forward, we'll need over time as for population growth and job growth, et cetera. And so what we really need to do, in addition to 100% affordable subsidized housing, we also need to find ways to make it cheaper and quicker to build housing for a broad range of households and incomes, because what we've really seen is the failure to do that is actually changing the demographics and has driven displacement, because as tech workers have moved in, they've actually seized on the existing housing stock and that supply and just renovated that stock, rather than because we haven't provided new housing for those who are newly coming to the Bay Area and in search of employment. And so that's really our philosophy on that really we need to increase this supply in particular as an anti-displacement tool as well. And so I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll kick it over to Graciela for her comments.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. Just a quick overview of what to expect and what happened this year in Sacramento. So January of 2020, everybody thought was going to be what was being kind of nicknamed the year of production. There was a lot of tenant protection bills that were passed last year. And so in 2020, the idea was year of production, we were going to come back, try to work on different pieces of legislation that would actually spur different kind of development in the state. That was in January. And then March happened and we all kind of woke up to COVID and what it would mean. Completely unprecedented, very, very different than what anybody was expecting. And so very quickly, even though the governor in his budget had been outlined a very aggressive and progressive agenda for housing, COVID kind of overtook everything, and it changed the legislative timelines as well. Suddenly, the legislature had to go on break sooner than anticipated. A lot of the timelines completely changed because we didn't know how they were supposed to vote if they were not going to be physically in the same location. So there was a lot of uncertainty and things had to be very fluid. So what ended up happening was a truncated time frame where pieces of legislation, the normal kind of discussion that happens, having the community weigh in, having people come up to Sacramento and discuss, was just not an option this year. So first it was COVID, and that's kind of took precedent. Then obviously we had some of the heat waves that ended up happening, which caused rolling blackouts. And then we had the fires. So literally one crisis after another made it very difficult for people to focus on a longer term solution for production. That kind of took the backseat, even though it is a crisis as well, that has become difficult to have a discussion over. So as a result, you ended up having a lot of pieces of legislation that would have helped just kind of fall to the wayside. The other thing that looking forward, we really need the market to kind of help us fill in the gap, because at the end of the day, we haven't fully seen the devastation that our state economy is going to have. I think that is coming, and we will see that especially in the next budget. So some of the pieces of legislation that, for example, Michael was talking about, looking at how to reduce impact fees or something like that, where you are going to impact the local coffers, are going to be more difficult to have next year, simply because a lot of the local governments are going to be hurting for money. So this is an opportunity where we turn to the actual private market to say, how can you help? And so some of the legislation that we're focusing on is what we call gentle density, right? Like 1120, which was one of the big bills that the pro tem was pushing, is how do we have some of those, how do we help small developers start providing by making it easier for them to do ministerial, or having them take advantage of ministerial approval, which basically says, hey, as long as you follow a checklist, you go move forward, you get a permit to build. How do we actually ease some of their cost burden so that they can actually provide additional units that we need? So that is one of the kind of overall goal that we're looking for. We're talking about duplex, triplex, fourplex, smaller units. One of the things that has been interesting in Sacramento is kind of the idea of production and development. And I think that is synonymous with big luxury apartments, right? And so part of the thing is that there is this distrust when it comes to what the market actually would produce. And it becomes hard to have a conversation about anything that is smaller, creating like naturally affordable units. So I think that's one of the things that we are working on, educating a lot of the members and educating staff about. What we are talking about is not market rate luxury. We're talking about market rate that is affordable. If you look at the health and safety code, something is affordable if a person is paying 30% of their income. Well, most people that are now in moderate income families are not even, they're paying 40%, 45%. And especially in our low income communities, they're paying 50, if not more. And so we're trying to figure out how do we change that conversation, because at the end of the day, as Michael was talking about, if we don't create housing in high cost areas, if you think of Oakland, San Jose, then people start moving to Sacramento. Sacramento has actually seen such an increase in population growth, not from people moving from out of into California or from other parts. They're moving from the Bay Area because it's becoming it's more affordable to drive from Sacramento to the Bay than to actually be able to live in the Bay. And we're trying to change that. We're trying to kind of really unlock some of the land. If you have a piece of property that is a quarter of an acre, you might be able to do, instead of just a single family home, maybe do another unit that actually would provide for somebody else. So we're trying to kind of have that conversation and to change. I think one of the things that has become very evident is it's a cultural shift for a lot of people, and to think of what it means to have what we say gentle density. And if you look at other places in the US, if you go back east, you actually have higher density than we in California are used to. So we really are trying to kind of have other examples of how it's not going to be so completely disruptive that it's going to change overnight. It really is kind of this idea of just having 1 or 2 units on a single family lot. So those are some of the conversations that we are having. Next year, again, a lot of the pieces of legislation, I think, that did not make it are going to be brought back again. 3155 from Assemblymember Rivas is something that we're probably going to be working on again. We're starting to engage some of the other community activists and other stakeholders to try to figure out where some of the discomfort might be, if we can address it, because it's so important. one of the things that is very disheartening is when pieces of legislation that can move the needle don't move, you lose another year. And so before you know it, 5 years have gone by and significant change when it comes to actual production doesn't happen. And at the end of the day, the people that get impacted are the people that are here in California that are not able to actually save for a down payment or be able to actually just save for a family trip or whatever it's going to be, or they're living paycheck to paycheck. So we're trying to kind of really look at this in a more comprehensive way, how up until now, housing has been seen as just a silo. And we're trying to actually connect all the dots on how it actually impacts our ability in the state to reach our climate change, how it actually impacts the ability for us to close the education gap, and how it actually impacts our ability to have healthy communities. And so by connecting all of those dots, I think we really are highlighting how vital having adequate, appropriate housing is in the state of California. So that's a big kind of holistic overview. One of the things that we are excited about that was we were happy that the governor stepped in and worked with the legislature to get accomplished was AB 3088, which basically provides, it's a stopgap solution to provide, ensure that people that have been impacted by COVID and don't have their financial means to continue to pay their full rent, that they are not evicted. And the only reason I say it's a stopgap measure is that it's only until February 1st. Starting in March 1st of 2021, people are going to have, they will get evicted, especially if they're not able to pay the rent. So that is something that, you know, we're hoping as soon as we come back, we're going to be able to start working on and trying to have a larger discussion. That will be dependent on what happens at the federal level, and if the federal government engages with California on how to solve that, because at the end of the day, California does not have a say about how landlords are going to be able to make their own payments on if they have payments that they have to make on an apartment building or whatnot. So those are larger conversations that have to be resolved with the collaboration and partnership with the federal government. So I know those conversations are ongoing right now, and we hope to have a broader solution that takes into consideration the tenants, but also the small landlords. So with that, just a quick overview of what's ahead.
Great, thanks so much, Graciela. Michael, do you have anything else to add that was sparked by that?
No, I just agree with Graciela. We'll want to come back immediately. For example, I know the AB 900 extension for CEQA is very important for the city of San Jose and downtown development, but it's also important for major projects across the state. We're seeing more and more mixed use developments that include significant housing. Also want to take advantage of that expedited judicial process if there is a CEQA challenge and create that kind of certainty, but also deliver really quality infill projects, LEED certified, et cetera. And so we'd like to see if that could come back immediately in January because it had such significant support, just ran out of time, you know, at the end of the session, broad bipartisan support even, but it's really important in terms of economic recovery and coming out of the pandemics. And so really that should be something the legislature is willing to move on immediately.
Great, thank you. So I think we have, let's see how many folks we have, about 40 folks on. I think we can manage to do, we have a small enough group that we can manage to have people ask questions and discuss on video. I would just ask everyone to keep your comments to 1 minute max, ideally 30 seconds, but you know, so that everyone gets a chance to speak. And remember also to step up and step back. So if you feel like you've been doing a lot of the talking, remember to step back and make space for other folks. And conversely, if you feel like you haven't been involved, think about joining in the conversation. So just to avoid running into each other, maybe if you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand. You should have a raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, but if not, feel free to type raise hand in the chat as well. That'll work fine. So yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments about the legislative process this year or next? Yes, Radha. Hope I pronounced that right.
I have a question for the speakers. After COVID hit, we also had a hit to our budget. So ambitious programs or well thought out legislation had to be put on the back burner or cut because of funding restrictions. As we look ahead to 2021, what do you see as viable or possible given given the budget situation?
Yeah, so maybe I could go first and then kick over to Graciela. Yeah, obviously, so the general fund is significantly impacted. However, recently voters have approved significant affordable housing bonds, and I know there's discussion about ramping up as part of a recovery strategy is to issue more of those bonds more quickly, because affordable housing can be counter-cyclical when the private market and lending seizes up. Oftentimes you can still go forward with the tax credits that may be available to the extent that there's still sufficient demand for them. And then these bond programs, and then you can try to acquire land if there is some kind of a downturn, versus there may be some sites that become available because a market rate developers decided not to go forward. Looking for opportunities like that, I think it even makes this whole idea though about affordability by design even more important. There's not a lot of additional subsidy dollars immediately available. How can we use home building and apartment building as part of economic recovery, build up our construction workforce to really help with that state's general fund and getting workers back to work? It's got to be a key component of it, I think, certainly. Yeah, and so that's really, I think, what we're going to focus on in the Capitol next year. In addition, obviously, homelessness dollars have been made available at the federal level, and those are coming through. And you've seen some of the initial results of Home Key and acquisition of hotels, and those will need to be, in some cases, significantly renovated, and that'll create some additional jobs. So hopefully we'll be able to bounce back from this fairly quickly, because it was artificial, in essence, economic downturn that hopefully will come back and markets will begin to respond fairly quickly, and that'll give us confidence that we can go forward with some general fund allocations as well, but that'll probably be farther out.
One of the things I know that California is hoping to actually receive is additional federal dollars. Obviously, California cannot print out money, but they can. And so I think that is part of the conversation that we're hoping, at least for this past budget, they were hoping that the federal government could provide California up to about $15 billion. And so the idea is that if they can, as Michael was saying, we hope that this recession will be short, because it's a very different year. And if that happens, if they provide us some federal funding, California can be better off. But you're right, absent of those federal dollars and absent the economy recovering, it is going to be very painful. I mean, most of the rainy day funds were used this past year, which actually was what helped California move forward. But really, when you look at the decrease in sales tax, which is, and the personal income tax, that is really going to have an impact for next year's budget. So we hope that if the feds kind of provide some money and our economy recovers more quickly, then I think we hopefully will be better off than we have been in the past. But
I see a hand raised from Leslie as well.
Hi, Michael and Graciela and everybody else. If folks saw in this morning's paper, there was an article about people's perceptions of housing, and not surprisingly, 90% of the people asked said that housing was in a crisis situation. And I'm not totally sure who those 10% were, but nevertheless, 90% said yes, but they also, the majority said that things should be handled at the local level. And we know that hasn't been that successful. And so I really do believe that state legislation is necessary. I think we've done a great job in recent years of building a coalition of people who are like-minded, who have pushed through some of the bills. But I think going forward, we need to broaden that coalition. And I'm just really interested from Michael and Graciela, who you think that all of the people who are on this call should be trying to bring into this conversation so that we have a little bit more muscle and brain power and support behind us.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I think really important, I think. It even came up when we were talking about opportunity housing, the city of San Jose. A lot of pro-housing elected officials, the incentives just aren't right for them, even though they'd like to do the right thing. There's just so much sensitivity around additional density, even if it's gentle density, as Graciela mentioned, there's still significant pushback. And I would also say the other aspect of this is that Livable California has really become more and more organized in the work in the Capitol and working with lobbyists and showing up at these committee hearings in a very vocal way. And that's why we have to be there with our message and with a strong coalition that's really the broadest coalition possible. And so instead of dividing up among ourselves as advocates, I think if we can have a broader coalition that can embrace, homelessness, affordable housing, missing middle, and then just greater supply, bring down the cost per unit, where it's going to take all of us to overcome neighborhood opposition and the opposition that has now moved to Sacramento. Because quite frankly, you can get broad support to be anti-development if you don't have the right narratives and you're not making the right case. So that, that includes, yes, our nonprofit and our advocates, but also the business community, really being more organized and focused. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with our coalition, is that instead of kind of on a one-off basis, pro-housing groups introducing a piece of legislation here or there, we want to have our own package like we did this year that we can endorse. And then, we were on calls with Graciela and others, and Leslie and our other advocates, and we'd have 20 or 25 advocates and organizations on a Zoom call talking with legislators. That really got their attention, and it made it clear that we have their backs, that there is blowback, that we're there, supporting them and making sure they understand this is something that's absolutely needed to make our society function, our economy function, et cetera. But they really need to see that support, particularly in the committee hearings, because they also go back home and hear a lot of the complaints as well. But it's going to take us to power through to be able to meet and overcome that kind of opposition to new development and to greater densities.
Yeah. And Michael, just for those who may not be familiar, could you briefly explain what livable California is?
Yeah, and there are different terms. I think they're called residentialists in Palo Alto. But, really people who talk about neighborhood character and preserving single family zoning, generally opposed to new developments. And they're literally NIMBYs, not in my backyard. But they've also recruited local city council members, for example, to serve and to be spokespeople and put out YouTube videos, et cetera. And they also have lobbyists in the Capitol. And basically, we had, the bills that we were supporting around these production packages, they had their anti-campaign, which they called Nix the Nine. And on their website, they had all the bills that they opposed, which were basically all the bills that we supported to increase the supply and affordability of housing in California. And of course, they fall back when it's a local issue, land use and zoning at the local level, knowing that the incentives just aren't lined up right for most local elected leaders to be able to make those hard calls and approve developments.
Looks like Norma has her hand up.
Yes. Right. And then after that, we'll Vince, who said great.
I have a sort of a comment and a question. Two of my favorite bills were 1120, the one with allowing the duplexes and perhaps a third unit on any lot. And there was also a companion bill, I don't remember, it wasn't a companion, it was another bill that sort of gave cover to local city councils to establish areas of whatever, essentially to do targeted zoning where perhaps they would allow duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, or up to 10 units, I think was the way it was written originally. And I thought that was great because then you don't, I thought 1120 was obviously probably politically dead because it gives an organization like Livable California, you've frightened everyone. Like I'm from Los Altos, so essentially we have 10,000 single family parcels here, usually a quarter acre and up. And so that makes everyone everyone oppose, whereas if the city council gets to judiciously locate areas where it would like to see some, or where people would be okay with, like next to each other, a bunch of duplexes starting to pop up, or triplexes, to confine it, let the city council and the city, the planning commission, whatever, citizens task force establish those areas, that would be good. And the other good thing was increasing the RENA quota for the cities. So I think that focuses their mind, and increasing the ability to pursue lawsuits when they don't do something. So I think that all those things together would help in a place like Los Altos and help produce the missing middle. That's it. Any comments? Was there any, and so I kind of noticed the lack of synergy, like individually the bills are there and you can look at them, but you don't see how they can work together to get the result in the market.
And one of the things I just want to highlight, 1120 actually got out of the assembly and also of the Senate. So it does have the support in the legislature. Unfortunately, you know, for this year, any measure that needed to move had to be passed by both houses and sent to the governor by midnight. And on Monday, unfortunately, that didn't happen for, you know, 1120 was run out of time. But the idea is, we know the votes are there. We know that, you know, we're going to have to come back and make sure that everybody's hearing from their communities to say, this is a smart piece of legislation that should move forward. And at the end of the day, it actually does provide just a little more flexibility in some of the areas where you actually have these similar type of policies. One of the things that we are working on is trying to make sure that we compile some of this data where in places that this has become the law, like Oregon and Michigan, it hasn't been this huge upturn of a community that people fear. So we want to make sure that we provide that information and a little bit of data in other places where this has become the law. But no, we're bringing it back. It has the support, and we're going to keep pushing for it. So thank you, Norma.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. But what about the fate of that that other bill that lets city councils get cover and not be sued or have CEQA when they did this targeted rezoning? Because that would be even, it would be even.
So that's SB 902 by Senator Weiner. And that was the idea, you know, to overcome the subdivision map act when you do lot splits and you subdivide, then it would trigger CEQA. But this would be at the discretion, as you say, of the local jurisdiction. So that's quite frankly a bill that can and should pass, and it has to be brought back immediately.
Okay, thank you. What was the number again?
SB 902.
902, okay, thank you.
Then let's go to Vince and then Edgardo. I see a couple hands raised.
Hey, thanks. I see so many friendly faces here, and Michael and Leslie and Graciela and everyone were such leaders in hurting us all this year in Sacramento virtually. So it was nice. We got to make a lot of meetings and really emphasize to the legislature how important this housing package is. And I think to your point, Norma, I think Graciela was helping paint that picture of how some of these bills interlock because they're very complementary in many cases. And one frame of thinking I want everyone to maybe take away as well is when you have some of the market rate components or middle income housing components being easier to produce in California, a lot of that type of housing will increase the tax base, in many cases pay impact fees or have inclusionary components or have other measures paying building permit fees to cities that generate both tax revenue and affordable housing dollar revenue. So the market side of the equation actually is what generates sustainable revenue streams for the below market side of the equation. So I think being very pro below market rate housing is important for all of us, but then also ensuring that the below market rate housing has that stream of either dollars or inclusionary percentages included. You need the market rate side. So I think some of these bills, the year of production was aimed at that, saying, let's generate that market rate activity so that the below market rate can benefit. And I think that's key to this equation because it has to be all sides of that coming together to make housing affordable at many levels.
Thoughts?
So
yeah,
when SB 50 went away, I think we didn't keep anything that was transient oriented. And I thought that being transit oriented was the key in building coalition, especially with the environmental movement. What's your expectation for next year in terms of transit oriented legislation?
Well, but let me take a step back. There is this idea of transit-oriented, but I think, for example, if you take a piece of legislation like 1120 that is actually trying to build an existing urban core, the idea is you already building, instead of having, for example, the suburbs that are being built, if you look at what has happened in like Southern California, where people cannot afford to live in LA or Orange County, so they end up having to move out to the Inland Empire, Moreno Valley, and those areas of the state that have not been developed. you basically end up creating a transportation issue where they're having to drive 2 hours and it's completely congested. And so the idea is by actually having these smaller projects that 1120 would allow, you're continuing to build in your urban core. And the idea would be to actually have people that are living and working in those same communities. You're just creating more capacity. So even though there might not be a direct link, although some of the 1120 also spoke to reduction of parking depending if you were close to transit stations or like transit hubs. So those are some of the things I think it might not be quite as apparent, but that is the goal at the end of the day with these pieces of legislation.
Can I follow up?
Of course.
Yeah. So yeah, I see what you are saying, but sorry, I don't think that's the case in most cases. I like 1120 and I wish it would have passed, but for example, the concerns in San Jose about focusing on the urban villages versus sprawling anywhere in the city. If it's in the urban villages, they can focus on more buses and more transportation on those very specific cases, while if you spread throughout the whole city, it's almost impossible to get good transportation, so you'll get a lot more opposition from all kinds of neighbors. It's very easy to attack it when you don't concentrate on specific cases.
I would just quickly say I was really bullish on the bill that would have allowed residential development in commercial zones, and those are oftentimes on major transportation corridors and major arterials, for example, and some of these legacy commercial centers that really need to be redeveloped in kind of a mixed-use approach, which I think begins to get at that. The other tool, of course, is density bonus. We try to do a density bonus bill for moderate income housing, inclusionary within a market rate development, but that was opposed by some equity groups. Also was looking at a property tax welfare exemption somehow to try to make some of these developments pencil where they're certainly below market in very high cost areas, but they're really between 80 to 120% of AMI, for example, of the households that you're trying to target there. There was opposition of that. And I think the other point is parking requirements. We have to come back and continue to chip away at that and reduce and eliminate parking requirements to the extent possible, particularly in the TOD areas and low VMT areas that you're talking about.
And I would just say from SV at Home's perspective, it's a yes and. We need to do both. We're going to have extraordinarily high housing goals coming forward in our regional housing needs, not just San Jose, but the entire South Bay. And it's not going to be solved by one thing. It's going to be solved through a number of different tools. And so we need to approach both the urban villages and get those turned on, which they're not right now for the most part. And we need to address more high density housing near transit. And we need to deal with the 90+% of our residential land that is now restricted to single family zoning. So we have to do it all.
I want to make sure, Norma.
Yeah, I'll speak to that second part, the infill on the 90% of the land. With giving cover to, with SB 902, in a place like Los Altos and Palo Alto, I mean, you could upzone the streets that have existing VTA bus routes on them, and VTA with COVID now is having, I'm reading, cutting back service. If there were more people living along there, even if there was only fourplexes on all these collector roads, which now have single family homes on them, that would help VTA. That would be transit, get people out of their cars. You don't necessarily need a car to live in Los Altos anymore and similar towns. That's it.
Yeah, I think we have time for one last comment, and then I actually wanted to have a short presentation about another issue, specifically about transit, actually. Does anyone have sort of a final thought on this? Michael, Graciela?
Yeah, thank you so much. We'd love to follow up with you about new ideas as well that we can bring back next year in terms of legislation, identify some authors. And it could be, building typologies, it could be materials, building code, it could be regulatory as well. So we'd like to continue to work with this group on that and invite you to join us in our advocacy at the state level. Also want to say before I sign off, SPUR is also pleased to support Measure RR and Caltrain for events.
Yeah, definitely. If people have new ideas around various sorts of legislation, getting in touch with your legislators, getting in touch with us at SV at Home, always a good idea to be pushing pro-housing ideas. The more they hear from you, the better.
The only thing I was going to say is, especially if we can't return back to normal, if COVID is the new normal for the next few months, I think one of the things that we will be relying on is this community to basically help us ensure that we are reaching the legislature and all of the members that represent the diverse parts of the state to basically say these are good pieces of policy. So we will be relying on you for your help with that. So thank you. I know many of you did that last year and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Much appreciation to all of the housing advocates working on these issues. So for our last few minutes, we're actually going to hand it over to Vince from SVLG, who will be talking to us a bit about Measure RR, which is a local measure to fund Caltrain. Should tie in nicely with our discussion so far about transit and how that relates to housing. And I'll just remind you, just put a bug in your ear, that next hack will be on October 30th. So get on our newsletter and you'll hear about it as soon as we have it out. All right, Vince?
I think I'm successfully sharing the slide, right?
Looks good to me.
All right. So RR, what is this? It's a funding measure for Caltrain to do basically three things right now: rescue Caltrain, relieve traffic, and reduce pollution. Caltrain for a while now has been essential to the transportation network here in the Bay Area. It helps complete the ring around the Bay once we get BART to San Jose, downtown San Jose, of ring of rail around the Bay. And many folks understand that the pandemic won't last forever and traffic will return. So if we don't have Caltrain operating when we need it, it'll mean bad news for our commuters and bad news for our environment. To get it on the ballot, we needed 7 government bodies to pass a resolution. It's a 3 county-wide 1/8 cent sales tax. Had to go through Santa Clara, San Francisco, and San Mateo counties, their affiliated transit agencies, and the Caltrain Board of Directors. So big lift. We got it done at the last minute. RR's improvements would pay for the equivalent of, would be the equivalent of putting 2 lanes of traffic on Caltrain instead of 280 and 101. So let's get into the details. What is RR? It's a 1/8 cent sales tax, 3 county-wide, Santa Clara, San Mateo, San Francisco. It would raise about $108 million annually. Essential items like groceries, rent, medicine are exempt from sales tax. Measure RR ends after 30 years, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. RR is key to helping Caltrain fulfill its business plan of nearly tripling ridership from 65,000 riders today to 180,000. These are pre-COVID numbers. Again, we expect they'll come back. Why do we need RR? It's actually a system without its own source of funding. It currently relies on 2 things. One is 70% of the funding of Caltrain is through riders paying tickets. It's one of the highest, I think, in the country in terms of fares generating the revenue for a transit system. I think VTA might be around 20% paid for by riders and 80% subsidized. So it has a low subsidy rate already. So people are voting with their dollars to ride Caltrain. And the other 30% comes from the 3 counties writing a check every year. So VTA, Muni, and San Mateo Transit District each have to write a check to Caltrain every year to help fund it. By giving Caltrain its own funding, it actually allows VTA, Muni, and San Mateo County to better fund their bus system and better fund their other transit. I think we've already seen some of that stuff. So also, the Caltrain Board of Directors also has an equity plan. They want to make sure that more people can have access to means-based fares up to a 50% discount. More frequent trains is more equitable because not everyone works 9 to 5. Many essential workers work off hours. So this would help fund Caltrain being more of an all-day, everyday service instead of a 9 to 5 service, very limited weekend runs. It would allow for better coordination with BART, Muni, Samtrans, and VTA. Right now, during the pandemic, like I said, that 70% funded by riders is not really coming in. People aren't riding Caltrain as much. So right now, there's a very real possibility Caltrain may shut down. It would cost over 2 years about $155 million just to shut down. They still have to maintain the rail. They still have to pay for certain operations. They wouldn't be getting any revenue. There would be no ticket sales. There would be no other revenue streams coming in. And so the concern would be if they're not running, they're not making money, they still have to pay for all these upkeep costs. And restarting it is very expensive for our region. Good news is voters understand how important Caltrain is. We went out to the voters in June. This was months into the pandemic, and they were still supportive of Caltrain. They were right about that 2/3 margin at 65.6%, which statistically is just 2/3 of the vote when you initially ask them if they support it, with arguments in favor of Caltrain and why it's important. That number went up to 70.9%. This is a very achievable, winnable campaign. It does need 2/3 to pass. It is a special tax. You know, I don't think I've ever seen a campaign that had this many people from all sectors coming together to support it. Everyone realized how important it is. We were able to get ballot signers from the business community, from the environmental community, transit advocates, equity advocates, Mayor London Breed, Sam Liccardo, Dianne Feinstein, Cindy Chavez. You really just had everyone getting on board, making sure this happened. Some of our housing champions also understand that good transit is key to good housing. David Chu is a ballot signer. He's a great housing champion in the assembly for us. And so this was business, labor, environmental folks coming together. Again, I've just never seen the number of people coming together for this kind of endorsement of this race. I think we have over 140 endorsements combined. Again, unions, people across the political divide from left to moderate in the Bay Area. That's about where it goes. And they're coming together. So that's my presentation. Certainly happy to go back or answer any questions.
Yeah, do folks have any questions about RR? That's okay if not. I'm sure Vince can tell you where to find more information.
Yep, I believe it's rescuecaltrain.com. I will put the website in the chat just to make sure I put it right. But we actually have a fact sheet there. So if you have, or rescuecaltrain.org, put it in the chat, and you guys should be able to share that with folks.
Great. Thanks so much, Vince, for bringing that to us. And thank you everyone for joining today. Our next hack, as I mentioned, will be on October 30th. But we also have a bunch of other events coming up, including candidate forums, one of which is tonight, 7 p.m. I dropped a link to our events page there in the chat. There you can find SB at Home events, but also all kinds of partner events, other housing events around the area that we like to maintain a calendar there. So check that out. And yeah, we'll see you next time around. Thank you very much to Michael and to Graciela for joining us today. Really appreciate your experience, and thanks for everyone else who joined and shared their opinion. Yep, have a good one.